Charles Konsitzke, you and I met sometime back at a week-long training put together by the Defense POW MIA accounting agency, and it was a week of new information for me. I didn't know much about what the agency did, but it wasn't for you. You'd actually been very involved in the recovery of remains of missing service members in Europe from the Second World War, and so that's what we want to talk about. And you are you're the lead of a group that has a mission to find the remains of missing service personnel, and I think your focus is Western Europe, right? Your focus is Western Europe
currently.
And so your mission there at the University of Wisconsin is pretty much the same mission as the DPAA, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. But just to get into it, where did your own interest in this project come from? Because if I understand it right, your work with this project, that is being very involved in the recovery of missing service members in Europe from the Second World War, that is not actually at the top of your resume. At the top of your resume is another job at the University of Wisconsin, which keeps you very busy. So you're spending a lot of time and energy and personal resources on this MIA project. Where did this interest for you start?
So, I mean, the interest comes from really a family. I come from a very large military family. If you look at all the family members, everybody has it's about 300 plus years of service to the nation, and we still have family members that are actively in the military on this current day and actively working on overseas, etc.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a small military town in Wisconsin. I was in the military for a couple of years. However, I was uncharacterized discharge prior to boot camp because of a ankle reconstructive surgery.
Oh.
So it was one of my ways, I think, of really, paying it forward. And because of my father. Excuse me?
I'm sorry, of making a contribution to the country, a contribution that's related to the military, but because of this injury, you weren't able really to do that in uniform. Here's a way to do that kind of as a civilian.
Exactly. And it wasn't, I didn't have this planned. It really walked into our center. So I'm associate director of the University of Wisconsin Biotechnology Center. So I oversee activities and operations of a large scientific center. And one of those realms is DNA analysis. And what we had was a civilian researcher come into the center who thought, had a high probability of a soldier, PFC Lawrence Gordon, of knowing where they were. And, I stated to him, well, there's an agency for this. Well, at that time, the agency wasn't working well with this individual. So I said, well, let me look at your research. I mean, I've been in research administration for over almost 20 years now. So
wow.
We do a lot of scientific readings, etc. And there has to be some, possibility or probabilities. So we looked at it as material, and it was pretty impressive. So I brought in a friend who was a forensic anthropologist and another who was a forensic odontologist. And we looked at the material, and there was a high probability that this individual who it was. And that really introduced me to the MIA issue. And I was shocked that there were 83,000 plus MIAs at that time.
Wow.
Coming from a military family where you've always heard you leave no man behind, I expected maybe it was a couple thousand, but to find out it was 83,000 from World War II and on,
wow,
I was shocked. And in the environment that I see the cutting edge technologies that we're using. I knew and I could see that there were tools and possibilities to better this with an academic angle.
Yeah.
So that initial case is what really kind of sparked the fire underneath us at
So here's where it begins. This individual, if I've got the story right, this individual comes to you. This individual's from Wisconsin. He comes to you, says, "Look, I've done research, and I think I have a pretty good idea about where the remains of Lawrence Gordon might be." Okay, so that's interesting. And I mean, you do an admirable thing. I think a lot of folks, a response to somebody just walking in from the streets would be, "Look, I'm really busy." You know what I mean? But so I'm impressed that not only did you pay attention, but you dug into it. And then my mind goes to the photos I've seen, which we'll edit into this video, of you and your crew there, in France, actually doing the work. So this stops being an abstraction real quick, and I mean, literally now we've got our hands in the dirt. Just real quick, I mean, what were some of the key steps that took it from your, I'm sure, very nice building in Wisconsin to the mud of France and actually getting this work done?
So there were many steps actually and many discussions, and it wasn't just with the university, it was also with politicians. It was with DPAA or JPEC and DPMO at that time. They were in a transition as well due to numbers. And the idea, we met with DPAA in the fall of 2015 regarding this idea of working with academia. And December of 2015, we informed DPA that we're going to proceed with the Fazekas recovery mission and if they would be willing to partner with us. And
this is Frank Fazekas.
Frank Fazekas, yep.
Okay.
And it was a tough decision for them, but you can see it has become a fruitful decision, and they agreed and they provided the tools in the field, and we provided all the cost for that initial project. Wow. So the University of Wisconsin Biotechnology Center covered the costs of that initial case. It was a very eye-opening experience for everybody.
Give us a couple more sentences to clarify that last sentence. An eye-opening experience for everybody. How so?
Well, one, because DPA really hadn't worked with a academic institution where the academic institution was taking the lead on recovery.
Yeah.
The University of Wisconsin, this was very new for them as well, because there are many probabilities of other events within that environment of success or no success, and that it was
a lot of money.
Yes, it was a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of risks on both sides, but I believe everybody could see the benefit with the outcome, and the outcome was positive, and the outcome was the recovery of Frank Fazekas.
Yeah. Now I know that there are some things you can't say, and so if you can't say that, are you able to say what kind of evidence you found that then you were able to say, okay, yeah, this is the guy, this is Frank?
Yes, we are still in communications with the son, Frank Fazekas. With the first summer recovery of Frank Fazekas' site, we allowed the son to come to the site after we confirmed that the M2s, the machine guns from the plane, confirmed that was Frank Fazekas' plane. The son, Frank, was roughly 6 months old when his father passed. He never knew his father, so this was a very, I would say, a spiritual, noble moment when he came to the site, because he'd never met his father. This was the first time that he was ever close to his father. Mm-hmm. But his son has given us authorization to talk about what we have, what we found on site. And that was material evidence, that was osseous remains. It was material evidence.
Bone remains, yeah.
Yep. Dog tag. We found his silk map. We found coins. We found a number of things that were.
And DNA testing was done on the osseous remains, and then you had a positive.
Yes, and let me note, So regarding the DNA analysis, we did not perform the DNA analysis for the Konsitzke case. The one case that we did perform the DNA analysis on was Lawrence Gordon's case, PFC Lawrence Gordon's case.
Tell me about that first instance when you thought, oh wow, I mean, we found something.
It's a moment when you find osseous remains because you don't have confirmation until you do the DNA analysis. But when you do find those remains, if you find any remains, it's a big win, because that means we found the individual who we're seeking. We know that there will be a burial, there will be closure for the family, and that's probably the biggest part of it, is that closure.
Yeah. I'm interested in this may seem like a sort of a dumb question, but I'm interested in the sensation. Was it when, I don't know, are you holding this thing in your hand? You're looking at it. I mean, it's obviously you have eyes on it.
Yeah.
And, even though the testing hasn't been done yet to make sure, you've got a pretty good sense, you're in the right spot.
Right.
Is that a feeling of elation? Is it a feeling of melancholy? Is it a mix of both?
All. There's a lot of hugs, a lot of high fives. There's tears. I'll give you, I'm going to jump ahead here, but just to give you a scale of how people are committed in the academic realm. This last year when we were on site, or this last summer when we were on site, after that summer's mission, we, en route to the airport, we stopped at the Ardennes Cemetery. And if you go there and you look at the tablets of the missings, there are, hundreds of missing within that facility. And to the left of the names are rosettes. Those rosettes note that those individuals have been found and recovered. When we were there last year, there were 12 rosettes. Of those 12, 2 of them came from our team.
Wow.
Which is, everybody just walked away and either was crying or there wasn't a dry eye out of our whole team, because it shows that the time and commitment that they put in, as well as while they're learning, there is a positive end goal. Every time I talk, just to give you an example, when I talk about cases, you can see my excitement, the goosebumps, because it really, I was lucky that none of my family members are missing or have been lost in any type of conflict.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine what families, actually I do know what families are going through, because I've spoken to many of them. And that's our end goal, is just to help with that.
Even just hearing you talk about it, I had goosebumps, and I have no idea what it would have been like to be there. A few minutes ago, you used the words noble and even spiritual. You said, and this is something that I've actually thought about. And I don't know, there is, just in my observation, listening to, when you and I were in Honolulu, listening to people from the DPAA talk about discoveries, listening to you now, there is something profoundly psychological, something profoundly spiritual about it that really interests me. And let me just throw this at you. And again, this may seem like a bizarre kind of question, but and I think in a certain way, it's an unanswerable question, really. But I'm interested in hearing your response, or it's maybe not even a question, it's just a thought. But when you hear about some of the remains that are found, we're talking about osseous remains, you say. So maybe a small piece of bone, a dog tag, for example. You had more, but let's say that's what we have. And with these 2 things, then we can identify, okay, yeah, this is the guy, right? But even that language, this is the guy. But really, what are we saying? We have a small piece of bone and a dog tag.
Right.
It's obviously not the guy in a literal sense.
It's not completely.
Yet in some profound sense, everybody knows what you mean. Yeah, this is the guy.
Yep.
Having been there, maybe it's a little esoteric, but having been there, can you explain that or just spell that out a little bit, what your thinking is on that?
That is a good question, because everybody understands.
Yeah, it's like an instinctive,
It is.
that's the guy. I get it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, and I think what it is for us, when you find that initial piece per se, or initial evidence,
Yeah.
it's the site is the guy. It's hard to explain because it just doesn't apply to what you have in your hand. He's here, and you know he's here. I mean, I guess one of the things, this may be foolish to say, but when we come to a site and we see it before, when we walk into a new site, grass is long, everything. And I always have just a little conversation is, I've talked with the individual, the soldier, like regarding stone. We're here. Show us the direction.
Yeah.
Lead us in the right direction. You have, and you're looking at the site. So the guy, that the guy is there, but you don't want it to mislead you either, that everything that you find is, this is it. This is it. No, you have to think critically and thoroughly throughout.
Well, that's so interesting. I mean, this is so interesting, and what you're describing is really interesting, because on the one hand, there is something profoundly psychological, even perhaps something profoundly spiritual going on. But yet also, though, you don't want to be overcome by sentimentality, right?
Exactly.
You still have to be objective, reasonable, not get carried away.
Correct.
Because we want this thing to succeed, right? And
exactly.
So, yeah, it's very interesting. Let me just, we've mentioned Frank Fazekas, and so his son, can you just tell us in a sentence or two what that was like when his son went to the site?
It was emotional. When he immediately arrived, we gave him 10 minutes of alone time with the site. We actually, we required everybody to step away so he could go to the side of the site. We had it fenced off where, we didn't want him in the excavation area.
Yeah.
And just watching him, I mean, I've had many conversations with Frank, and I still do to this day. And actually, this summer, he was going to be our scientific photographer because he was trying to pay it forward.
Yeah.
He was also in the military. He was also a pilot. So he understands the situation.
Yeah, and I'll just fill things in a little bit. You said that he was going to be your photographer for the planned recovery trip this summer, but you and I are speaking in this time of pandemic where much of society is effectively shut down. That's why you're at home, not in your office.
Correct.
And you are actually working very hard on the problem of the coronavirus in your work there at the University
Correct.
of Wisconsin.
Correct.
Let me just, so we've said a little bit about Frank Fazekas. We've mentioned a little bit about Lawrence Gordon. Let me just give you Lawrence's name and a couple sentences in response to that, and then Walter Stone, a couple sentences in response to that. So when you've said a little bit about how things got started with this person coming to your office with information about Lawrence Gordon. What can you tell us about that recovery?
So that recovery was it was a very unique story. So I'll give you a briefing.
Yeah.
So Lawrence Gordon is a Canadian who was working in Montana when the war broke out. Oh. He joined the U.S. military. He fought for the U.S. and was killed in action. During a period of time with the moving of deceased individuals, he was then accidentally misidentified as a German soldier and was buried in a German cemetery in France as a German unknown.
Wow.
Yes. And we had to work with every country. And at that time, with that kind of barrier with the JPAC DPMO at that time, yeah. Every country was working with us except our own. And that was one of the things that really boggled me, coming from a military family. But it was that period of time. Things have changed. Yeah. but the French were working well with us, the Germans as well as the Canadians, because all countries had to be involved because the cemetery in France is a French managed environment. It is a German cemetery, but it's French managed.
Oh yeah, okay.
While U.S. is U.S., it's managed by the United States. But we had also worked with the INPS, which is of the French authorities, which is kind of like the FBI of the U.S. And it was probably one of the most cordial experiences that I've experienced. Everybody wanted to see this work out, and it was kind of funny because you had Canadians, Americans, Germans, and French authorities at one table working together, and that it was kind of a new light for all of them.
Yeah, yeah. And so so you've got a Canadian serving with the Americans, buried in France, misidentified as a German.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing this involved disinterment and
Yes.
genetic verification?
Yes.
Are you able to say where things go from there?
So, yep. So we disinterred the remains. We had them flown here to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where our forensic anthropologists and ontologists reviewed the remains. Yeah. And then we had family sampling prior to, and then we did sampling from the remains and with confirmation here at the University of Wisconsin.
Wow.
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yep. I would have to say that was the first time that I've ever been on the O'Hare tarmac when the plane came in. It was because of chain of custody. We wanted to make sure that the remains were moved carefully and in a proper fashion.
Wow. Last person I'll ask you about, and then I just have one other question. Walter Stone, what can you tell us about Walter Stone?
Buster, as his family calls him, was a gentleman who was like any brother or uncle or great uncle. He was a gentleman who was a pilot of a P-47 who was protecting bombers on his last mission. And you probably read this in the news articles, but I think truly what he was doing is he was trying to protect his brother, who was in bombing missions elsewhere. But in theory, he was there to protect his brother per se. But
sure. It's in the cause in general.
Right. We don't really know what happened with his plane. We don't know if we have assumptions, but assumptions don't apply. But that project was in year 2. DPAA initiated that project in year 1. Okay. It was in a national forest in northern France, and it was in really rough terrain in a heavily dense forest, which they needed assistance with, and we followed that project up in the year 2 and completed that mission for DPAA. And
so you found remains there as well. Yeah, that led to a positive identification.
Yes.
So it sounds like that, now you're saying year 2, it sounds like, the collaboration with the DPAA has gotten better at that time. Yeah, and then, you and I met at this DPAA training in Honolulu early in 2020. As you and I speak now, of course, we've got this pandemic going, and we've got some serious economic troubles coming, and then one of the immediate effects of what's happening now is your recovery trip to France that was planned for the summer has been canceled. But when you look ahead, what are your hopes for, not just for future recovery, but also hopes for continued collaboration with the DPAA? What are your thoughts about that in general?
So one other area that we are focusing on right now, as you stated, we had 2 projects planned for this summer with DPAA. Both have been halted at this time. We're hoping that pending COVID outcomes to possibly, ramp these back up in fall. But right now we're turning all of our kind of focus within the MIA area on historical analysis. So I actually had a meeting this morning at 10 a.m. We have our Friday morning meetings regarding where we are, what we're doing, and what we're focusing on. Our overall goal with the UWMI Recovery and Identification Project right now is Wisconsin focused.
Right.
That's not a priority. I mean, it's a priority, but it's not. We focus on many missions, but Wisconsinites is one of our primary focuses.
Sure.
We've just finished working on all of our China cases, and we've got a few good leads there. And now we may be transitioning over to Italy is another focus.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. So the actual recovery trips are on hold as at the moment because of what's happening in terms of public health, but the work continues.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Charles Konsitzke, I think that's just really, really impressive. And it's so inspiring to hear you tell these stories. And I think it just must be amazing to be on the ground and to experience this. I really appreciate, what you have done and what you are doing. And thank you very much for that work, and thank you for your other work at the university, which happens to be a full-time job, and then you're doing all this stuff too. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Preston. I appreciate it.